Good afternoon and welcome to this D&AD Judges Insights session. Changing the world may sound like a lofty ambition, but the D&AD Impact category recognises and celebrates creative work that strives to do just that. We are joined this afternoon by an expert panel to talk about award-winning work that goes above and beyond commercial success, balancing the needs of people and the planet alongside client demands and business objectives. So let's crack on and introduce you to 4 members of this year's D&AD Impact jury. First up, the president, Kwame Taylor-Hayford, comes from an advertising background with major agencies like Sidley, Saatchi & Saatchi and Anomaly. In 2019, he co-founded Kin, a creative company that uses kinship to unleash commercial and cultural forces. He also set up Saturday Morning, a not-for-profit organisation that uses creativity to tackle racial injustice. We've also got with us Claudia Romo Edelman, a long-time champion of human rights and representation, who has worked with UNICEF, the World Economic Forum, and the United Nations Global Goals Programme, amongst many others. She is now a special advisor to the We Are All Human Foundation, which fights for equity, diversity, and inclusion all around the world. Also with us, Priya Prakash is a designer, entrepreneur, and educator whose work is focused on improving the world around us. She is the founder of Design for Social Change, an urban experience design studio which applies data, guerrilla research and next generation technology to build smarter cities for and with the people who live in them. And last, but by no means least, Kat Drew is the Chief Design Officer for the Design Council, whose mission is to make life better by design. Kat is particularly passionate about bringing designers together with other specialists to tackle social issues. She was a founder member of the UK government's Policy Lab, bringing together design thinking and data science to shape policy decisions. So that is an awful lot of insight in one panel. Let's crack on and start to look at the work that you flagged up as particularly kind of noteworthy from this year's selections. And I think we're starting with Volvo's Lifesaver product.
Het voelde me helemaal niet prettig worden. Daarbij kreeg ik op een gegeven moment ook wat steek in mijn rechterborst en toen ging het licht volledig uit.
In case of cardiac arrest, resuscitation within 6 minutes can make the difference between life and death. But the average arrival time of an ambulance is more than 9 minutes. So often, help arrives too late. With thousands of Volvos on the road, there's always one nearby. Introducing Lifesaver. We equipped Volvos with an AED and connected them to the National Call System for Resuscitation.
Degene die de Volvo bestuurt, die is aangemeld bij Hartslag Nu, die is burgerhulpverlener. En die krijgt de oproep, wat hij normaal gesproken via de app krijgt, via het Volvo On Call. Dus dat scheelt tijd en daarnaast wordt hij rechtstreeks naar het slachtoffer gestuurd.
Using the power of social media, we invited Volvo drivers to join the program. Then we trained them to drive safely to cardiac arrest victims and in how to use their AEDs. With our modest budget and a target of 25 volunteers, we saw an astonishing 200 drivers enlisting in the first 2 weeks alone. The project generated so much buzz that we exceeded expectations by nearly 1,000%, even making national and international headlines. Volvo's mission is that no one should be seriously injured or killed driving a Volvo car. But why stop there if Volvo can also save lives outside the car?
Okay, great stuff. Kwame, I believe this was one of your selections, so maybe you can explain what it was about this project that caught your imagination.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I found it was a really impressive and compelling piece of work from a brand that has hung its hat on safety. And like in the film, it talks about the safety that you experience in a Volvo car. What they've done with this project is extend it way beyond. Even in the times of COVID and with our struggles with the sharing economy, I think a project like this shows very clearly how a brand can have a really strong impact on an issue of, importance and an issue that goes way beyond sort of marketing communications and gets into people's sort of health and wellness. I was impressed with how well sort of crafted and designed the entire sort of communication around the initiative was, and also how they recruited people to join. They provided training and helped them understand the nuances of how to deal with someone that's in cardiac arrest, and ultimately, I think the future impact of an initiative like this, to me, is very clear. A project like this can scale really well across Volvo's network globally, and hopefully help lots of people in the process.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there the COVID situation, which is obviously we're all in, and why we're all talking from our separate homes at the moment. I think what's interesting about that is, we've seen a kind of outpouring of volunteering and, people stepping up to the plate. You mentioned that as part of this project. How exciting is it when you see a project that not only relies on a great idea or great technology, but also kind of empowers people to get involved and to make changes themselves? Yeah,
I think as human beings, we are very connected, and nothing makes that more apparent than what we're going through right now. So if people, care about each other and want to help, it's awesome that a brand is helping facilitate that, providing the training and kind of the practical knowledge that you need to help in those situations. But also, simple things like using technologies to connect to the call grid, so that when these calls come in, they can activate this network of people who've raised their hands and who say they want to help. And get them involved, really quickly in providing support.
Priya, this dovetails with some of the work that you've obviously done with Design for Social Change. Is this a project that kind of similarly impressed you?
It's definitely taking the data from one thing about impact is how you create behavior change, and looking at data coming in, you can see quite clearly that if you want to move on to if you design the car accident. So how do you design a better car accident? By coming up with new kinds of habits and behaviors, like actually saving a life and putting this by default. So you reduce the barrier to entry to save a life. So I think this definitely talks about creating a new category about actually saving lives, even though the car is meant to kill people on the streets. So I think this has definitely moved the automobile industry to think differently on a holistic design way to create actual impact. So I agree with Kwame as well. Very powerful.
And Kat, just finally for this one with you, changing behaviour is not an easy thing to do. I think we all know that. How exciting is it to see a project that kind of really embraces that challenge and seems to make such a success of it?
Behaviour change is really, really tricky. You need to think about people's motivations, people's capabilities, and also the opportunities for doing this. And this project really taps into what will motivate people to get involved, but also providing an opportunity, which, as Priya said, is now the default, to allow them to do that really easily.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay, I think let's move on to our next piece of work. So we've got 6 to get through altogether. Priya, we're going back to you. This is a hard one to explain, so let's just watch the video and take it from there, I think.
We have hospitalisations for children and premature death from us not having healthy homes.
Undoubtedly, we need healthier homes.
The cost of damp and mouldy homes on the health of Kiwi children has been laid bare in a new study out today.
As the nation's largest home lender, ANZ Bank made a commitment to help Kiwis live in healthier homes with interest-free loans for insulation and heating. But faced with a culture used to ignoring the issue, we had to make people care about the problem. Introducing a smart device in sheep's clothing, Mr. Humphreys.
What does he actually do? Apart from look cute.
He's very high tech, but he's got no electronics or batteries. He's all 100% sustainable materials.
His nose will go blue if it's under 18 degrees.
Yes.
And if it's over what?
65% humidity.
Right.
His horns poke up to the sky.
Created by coating one of Earth's most abundant materials, wood. In collaboration with experts in biodesign from the University of Waterloo, Canada, calibrated to World Health Organization standards and designed to evoke an emotional response. Mr. Humphreys was launched with a multi-channel campaign generating massive interest, made available to customers to help them know if they needed more insulation, driving record visits to our website with requests for Mr. Humphreys and our interest-free loans. Most importantly, Mr. Humphreys entered the classroom as a teaching tool for the next generation.
Why do you think he's called Mr. Humphreys?
Because humid is hum and then freeze is like cold.
When his
horns are pointing in the air, then it's really humid, and when his face goes like blue, that means it's really cold.
And 3 times more Kiwis now know who to turn to for a healthy home.
Priya, certainly the cutest thing that we're going to be talking about today, but tell us what it was about this project that so kind of interested you.
I think there were 3 things, Rob, that really interested me. First of all, going back to what Kat said about behavior change, it's really, really hard. In my studio, for example, Design for Social Change, we're very interested in nature-based systems and nature-based engineering. So using wood and using the hygroscopic properties of wood in such an elegant way and giving this anthropomorphic aspect to Mr. Humphreys and calling it Mr. Humphreys automatically creates a relationship between the child, the teacher, and making it so simple. It's like Reusability design, what you see is what you get. You know, the sensors react to the damp, also creates the education around the classroom. So I think the first thing is like measurable. Is this design helping to measure the impact? So yes, children are suffering from damp. That is coming across in a very beautiful, elegant, poetic way. The second thing is it actionable? Everybody can see what can be done. And even from an education perspective, the teacher in the classroom can explain to the students what's going on. And the third most important thing is it reusable? So the materials here are sustainable. It's not going to be part of another landfill with another IoT product. Obviously, there's a business model aspect to it, which is talking about the loans to be able to go and get, you know, improvements for the house to address that. So I found it extremely compelling and a very charming project.
Mm-hmm. You touched on it there, but you know, the idea of damp homes is not the most glamorous cause potentially that you know we're dealing with in kind of the creative world right now. What extra challenges does that bring, do you think, to a project like this?
I think given that we are talking about climate emergency and there's a lot of things that we have to make people aware about, not just about air, but also damp. It starts from your home itself. I think starting with small, everyday, mundane interactions, which people overlook. And I think damp is something that people tend to ignore until it gets too late and can actually lead to loss of life. I think it's taking unglamorous things and making this aspect of narrative and storytelling that good design tends to do and make an unglamorous problem really compelling. And I think that's another very charming aspect of this project.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned it there, and it also said it in the video that we watched, that the challenge here, the starting point, was trying to get people to care about this issue. Claudia, I wonder if I could ask you, you've worked with, you know, lots of big, you know, very important, but very kind of sometimes overwhelming issues with the organizations you've worked with. How often is that the starting point, that you need to make people care about something before you can do something about it?
Most of the time. I like, at the end of the day, the things that are sexy, that are like present, that people see, are out there, and they don't, like a lot of the times in humanitarian causes, you need to elevate the issue to start with, so that people see there is an issue, and therefore you need solutions to that issue. And I think that that's where there's a lot of value in trying to find new ways to interest people to things that they have not seen and make the invisible visible.
Mm-hmm. Kwame, I know you were also charmed by Mr. Humphreys. It was on your list as well, I think. What was it about this project that got you?
Yeah, for me, it's, to your point, very charming and incredible craft in executing that toy. Lots of thoughts about sustainability and longevity, and ultimately, you know, it's a tool for education. And Claudia mentioned the elevating and sort of humanizing, I guess, the issue, and getting people to understand that if it's not addressed, it can lead, you know, down a road that I don't think anyone wanted to go down. I think it's huge. It does so much in such a simple expression. Yeah, it's in my opinion, one of the best pieces of design that we saw this year in the category.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm sure we'll come back to the idea of humanizing big issues later on in our discussion. Next, Kat, I believe we're going to France with your selection with a French supermarket.
The greatest human challenge of our century is the ecological transition, and it won't take place without a food transition. Conventional agriculture is the leading cause of global warming and loss of biodiversity. Health problems are increasing, and the condition of farmers is more precarious than ever. As a leading retailer, we, Carrefour, have been part of the problem. We had to be part of the solution and put our power at the service of the food transition. We started by tackling the heart of the problem, the agrochemical lobby's attack on our food freedom. We fought to change an unfair law that forbids sale and cultivation of farmer seeds, destroying 90% of agricultural biodiversity. The black supermarket changed the law, and it changed the public opinion on Carrefour. Consumers said our action was much stronger than any classic brand statement. It encouraged us to launch the most important transformation of our history, Act for Food, a worldwide program of concrete actions for the food transition. From now on, our campaigns would become brave brand acts. Acts to improve our consumers' health. Acts to make our food system better for farmers and for the planet. Act for Food is a creative platform that led a deep transformation of the Carrefour company, impacting its business strategy, products, services, and operations. We financed 60,000 farmers in our quality program. We financed the conversion of 2,000 farmers to organic farming. We remade our own Carrefour label with the highest quality standards, deployed blockchain technology, built the largest vegan label on the market, made video surveillance mandatory in our slaughterhouses, and many more. Since its launch, worldwide sales rose by 3.1%. We became leader in organic food in France. Sales of fruits and vegetables rose by 5%. Online sales boomed by 30%. And Carrefour stock value increased by 9%. But most importantly, the whole company is now fully driven by this mission, as shareholders voted to engrave it in the company's bylaws. Be the leader of the food transition for all.
Fantastic. Quite a lot to cover there, Cam. But at a top line, what was it about this project that you liked so much?
I mean, I think that's exactly it. It was a deep design at the strategic level of the entire organisation. So it started out with the black supermarket, which is a really ingenious way of using a very provocative kind of brand experience in the supermarket to show the kind of ridiculousness of the law, which got changed. So, impacting policy at the very highest level, but it didn't stop there. And that's the thing that we really liked as judges this year, because, it was entered the previous year as well, but they kept on going. So this kind of helped them reframe their entire business mission. And you saw at the end of the video there, they said that they've even got it ingrained into the business articles of shareholders, which is really, really inspiring. So they're using design of products, of processes, this kind of the surveillance of the slaughterhouse. They're not just thinking about their own organisation, but they know they function within an ecosystem. So they are also working with the supply chains, with the farmers, supporting their transition. So it's really impressive. And it also shows that, for very kind of tough challenges like health and wellbeing, sustainable living, there is no one fix to it. You have to work across a portfolio of innovations, and you also have to connect with others. And so the nice thing as well, which we know, is that this has also prompted a shift in other supermarkets as well. So for all of those reasons, and I suppose I loved the way they were talking about it as well. So they were using phrases like getting to the heart of the issue, design is in service of social outcomes. We were part of the problem. They started with themselves first. And yes, they're an organisation, but all designers can also start with themselves as part of whatever they're designing. So for all those reasons, I thought it was just a very kind of impressive and inspirational design.
It also mentioned in the video that it was commercially successful, right? Their sales went up, I think, 5%, it said. What does that tell us, do you think, about the expectations of consumers at the moment and what they want from the brands that they're interacting with?
Yeah, and I think, lots of brands are saying that kind of this move to social purpose is really, really important at the moment. And actually over the last kind of 3 to 4 months, depending on which country you're in, lots of businesses have been shifting their business proposition to something which is kind of bigger socially to support the COVID emergency effort. So, this is a kind of a market increasing opportunity, but, they said that, but then they said, but our shareholders have also written in the social purpose to it. So it's not a kind of greenwashing, I don't think. It's really ingrained in everything that they do as a business.
I was going to follow up and say I totally agree with everything Kat said. I think what was compelling to me about this case was the depth of their commitment. They dipped their toe in the water with the black supermarket, and I think off of the success of that, they've clearly jumped in sort of both feet in the deep end, and they're completely transforming their entire business based on this approach. I think, and we talk a lot about this at KIN, you can be a force for good and a force for growth in the world. You don't need to choose either. And I found it's very clear that they are fully committed to moving the entire company and their, I guess, industry at large in that direction. Perhaps my only sort of criticism with the case is they weren't as laser focused on any one area, and it wasn't as clear exactly how they're driving impact in a few of the areas that they mentioned. But I think their overall commitment was enough for us to feel excited about making them a part of the selection.
And Claudia, if I could just ask you, Kat touched on the idea that they were very honest about the fact that they were part of the problem, and that, they were looking for a solution for this thing. How important do you think it is for organizations to have that level of awareness and to work on solving problems that they themselves are perhaps complicit in or have been complicit in the past?
I'm sorry. I absolutely believe that every company has a level of awareness of the problems that they are causing. It is actually to have the boldness and the courage to be able to address it in that way and say, like, we're going to do something about it. What I love about this case, and I've been always loving it, and like France has come up with agricultural solutions that are amazing, and I'm always super surprised that they don't pick up and really become a global standard the way that I would like to see, and really actually push for international legislation so that they could do it that way. And that's always a little bit my frustration with this, like, if they do it so well and so profound, and they were able to push so much in France, why are we not taking it on, like in a more, why are other companies and why are not other countries taking them on? But I do think that, like I do think that there's a level of genuinity that like the brand and the brands, like again, Intermarché and Carrefour and other brands have done it in France in the same way, and I admire it, and I love that they keep on going. And I'm pretty sure that right now in a time of COVID, where the consumer behavior will change so much, and the habits will change so much, and cooking will become essential, like, and people are going back to their own, like, wow, what really matters for me in my life is really my family and cooking and so on. These are the kind of brands that and companies that will be more agile to react and to take on, like cooking in general, and take on that space of safety and what matters for you. And so Mother Earth and people that are related to that right now in a more genuine way probably have a leader, like a leader position overall. Again, my frustration with this is that doesn't spark globally.
Absolutely, but I think we can all agree that agility is really exciting. We're going to see that more in the kind of months and years to come. From one huge problem to another, we're going to air pollution. And Priya, this is another one of your selections.
Yeah, so what interested me with Address Pollution was it started off as a campaign, and what they did was a very clever way of taking this idea of air pollution and postcode and using mapping to figure out where people live, to be able to bring awareness of the level of pollution just outside your house. And like we've seen lots of, again, IoT projects where people can measure air pollution, but they can't act upon it. So going back to being measurable and actionable, what I really appreciated with this campaign was it was not just a campaign with X amount of budget, and once that budget is over, it's gone. They created an API, an application protocol interface, where they basically did a mapping of all the postcodes and worked with King's College, who actually monitor London-wide air pollution. So anybody who had, like, say, for example, a real estate website like Zoopla could integrate that API on their own website. So when people are looking up for rentals or buying a house, they would also show the air pollution. So what they did was they did the third part, which I find really important for impact, is reusability. It goes outside your own campaign, and other people can use your API. So you spread the word almost like a network. And this is how a lot of businesses also saw the benefit of people trying to find a place using this API, bringing awareness. So it has this kind of manifold impacts. I thought it was a very clever way to take a single issue like air pollution, position it with this idea of looking for a place, but also look at estate agents who can integrate it. Obviously, one of the things, the downsides of this is the unintended consequences of your own success. So a lot of people, and one of the judges had made a fair point that, once you start having these kind of postcodes, you end up in a postcode lottery situation where you have rich people clamoring towards places where there is less air pollution and poor people being forced because now there's more awareness. So these are the kind of challenges that, design will be facing when we take more social issues and campaign-based issues using data and action to create change, but also seeing the consequences, the unintended consequences of that. So you have to find a kind of a denominator where everybody benefits overall.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you're analysing a project like this, the idea of unintended consequences, and I'm sure with these kind of projects, they come up reasonably regularly. How much should that be a kind of black mark to penalise a project? Or do you think kind of we should be aware that, innovative projects will lead to unforeseen things, and it's about how we then cope with those rather than necessarily penalising someone that they haven't thought through every single manifestation?
I think this is an excellent point, because a lot of people will argue that much innovation would not happen if people were always looking at the unintended consequences. But I believe that given the world we are in right now, facing climate emergency, I suspect people will have to think things through, because we can't just follow I won't take names of social media saying, oops, I didn't realize that this was the effect of this social network on people's voting preferences. We would have to be, as designers, a lot more responsible and cognizant of the kind of choices we make. So it might be very clever in the first part, but we will increasingly have to kind of, figure out what are the next steps and how is that going to impact going downstream.
Mm-hmm. Kat, Priya mentioned that one of the smart things about this project was that it used existing products or platforms or services to kind of, grow and to spread. How much of that do you think is that a lesson for creatives or design thinkers, that, you don't have to build everything yourself, you can find smart ways to kind of piggyback on other things that are out there?
I mean, I think this is kind of absolutely essential in design. Almost design's role is great at synthesis. It's great at looking out, seeing what exists already and bringing that together and combining it in new and innovative ways, and thinking definitely about kind of sustainability and how you reuse things. The first thing a designer should do, as well as understanding kind of what the challenges are, is looking out widely at what are the available ingredients and resources that they can use for their idea. And that also requires a very, very different design mindset. So a design that is a mindset that is kind of curious and humble, recognizing the idea might not be your own idea, it might be someone else's, but also a skill around making connections and building relationships, because that's the glue that actually sticks together your innovation. And it means you can get further faster, because if things are already out there, there's already trust and resources there. Just use those. Don't reinvent the wheel. Or reinvent a new type of wheel, rather.
Absolutely. We need to crack on, because time is ticking and we've still got 2 more to go for. Now, we asked all of you to suggest work that you wanted to talk about, and this was the most popular project. I think 3 of you selected this one. So let's have a look at the Lessons in Herstory project.
Christopher Columbus,
John Adams, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Madison.
If you swipe in the history book, you see men in every single page.
History absolutely has been his story. History has been written by men for men.
One of the problems with textbooks is they've stayed the same for a long time. One of the really neat things that Herstory does is it sort of presents them with a whole new world.
Her story is showing, young girls that you can do amazing things too. It's not a man's world.
app literally has the power to change history. It changes history, it expands history, and it empowers the person who's using it.
A lot of story gives me like confidence because I know that she did it, so, you know, I could do it too.
Like I said, 3 of our panelists today flagged this as something they wanted to talk about. Claudia, why don't you start us off? What was it about this project that you liked so much?
Working for the United Nations and UNICEF and organizations that deal with girls and students and formative years, that's exactly the kind of app I would love to have had in my hands to apply globally. Because you know exactly that it is those years in which you start forming your opinions, what matters, the role models. If you can't see it, you can be it. And it's a simple, clever app that allows you to scan books. It's scalable for me. You can scan books and you can apply that to sculptures if you're going to the park. You know, like when I saw these some time ago, I started going like, yeah, you can actually, like, if Pokemon was able to do it, man, like finding Pokemon, I can find in every sculpture in the gardens, you know, like who's the woman behind it that we're not seeing, and where's, you know, like not only history books, but just applying a bias, a positive bias by unveiling that side. And again, the part that took me was the incredible potential that it would have to get into schools and educational systems, and in particularly in those formative years. I think that it is simple enough to be able to, you know, like to be able to be replicated and scaled into languages. And I simply love how they took the his story for her story. So I didn't even notice that. But I'm like, I think that, again, that's one of the things that I would like, yep, this is one that I would have loved to just like have in my time at UNICEF and just put it as a global, you know, like, and again, I think it is still doable to put it as a global stamp and see how you can apply it.
Mm-hmm. Kat, AR is a technology I think a lot of people still aren't super familiar with. Could you talk a little bit about the creative potential of that technology, and are we going to see it kind of rolled out in a lot more places, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely hope so. I think we're seeing it more in kind of creative and literary ways. But for me, the real potential about AR is being able to prototype things kind of digitally at scale with people that you might not be in contact with. So that's got a massive opportunity potential at the moment, obviously, where we can't get to people and test things with people to work out what would work and also the unintended consequences. But also to be really, really playful with what could be. So part of the magic of design is being able to move into this creative process of imagining new worlds, new possibilities, new ways of thinking, and to immerse people in that so they can get a taste of it. And whether that's the design or that provokes them to come up with another idea, either work, but using AR to really build these different experiences for people at a low cost feels kind of revolutionary for me in our design practice.
And I think it's always so exciting to see kind of playfulness, you know, harnessed to those quite serious and you know, big issues, isn't it? Kwame, you were somebody else who picked this project. I wondered if, you know, you've done, your work with Saturday Morning is all about using creative ideas to kind of tackle racial bias and racial injustice. You know, do you see that, you know, this is the kind of technology and project that could be applied to lots of different representation issues, whether that's, you know, gender or race or sexuality? You know, is that the potential Claudia's talking about, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with this project, it's so easy to see how big an impact it can have if it's scaled and if it's applied at the right points in a person's life and in their education. You know, I think history as we know it has been told from one very specific perspective, and I would argue that's the white male perspective. And so to see a project like this, which helps unearth some of the really important stories that help empower or help highlight and empower women, but also help, you know, provide a different lens on some of the stories that we've heard probably for years and years and years, is huge, you know. And I think there's been a bias in education, there's been a bias in the media, and I think as we are becoming sort of more aware you're seeing new and different voices and new and different stories being told. And to me, that's what's exciting about the project, and that's what, you know, I hope will continue. From an augmented reality standpoint, I think the technology is going to be massive. You know, I've worked on a few projects using AR in the past, and the bandwidth in terms of a network wasn't there, and the hardware and the software wasn't quite there. But I think in the next year, you're probably going to see a lot more in that space. And the idea of being able to have virtual information overlaid on your real world, so you can be kind of present even while you're interacting with this virtual information, I think it's going to be a game changer.
But also to see that, you know, not just enhancing what you're seeing in the real world, but subverting or changing what you're seeing in the real world. That, you know, that's something that I don't think has been necessarily explored in lots of ways. So really exciting to see that. So our final project then in our show and tell section, and this is Gillette's First Shave campaign. And Claudia, this was your selection.
And you go south, south. It's always south first.
South, south, north, north, east, west, never in a hurry.
Yeah.
Right. And I always knew I was different. I didn't know that there was a term for the type of person that I was. I went into my transition just wanting to be happy. So you always hear man up or be a man. And so growing up, I was always trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to become, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of man that I want to become.
You have to say, this is my life, and I'm going to live it the way I know best. Now, don't be scared. Don't be scared. Shaving is about being confident. Oh, you're doing fine. You are doing fine.
It's not just myself transitioning, it's everybody around me transitioning. I'm at the point in my manhood where I'm actually happy.
I absolutely love this for so many reasons, and I've loved it from the very beginning. I think it's brave for a brand to start with, that is going into the, you know, like the jugular here about saying, like, I might actually be, you know, like upsetting my base. But I think actually it was a clever interpretation of the marketing data, seeing how, you know, like the decline of the usage of Gillette by traditional men the age, and how the next generations were by far more fluid and by far more open, and taking that data and mixing it with the lack of visibility that trans and the LGBTQ community had, particularly trans and role models, and actually putting someone that is adapted, and, you know, like, and taken by the parents, that is normally the problem, and saying, like, this is the first shave, and I'm embracing you as an older generation to the new generation. So for me, this is clever, brave, and really, really effective. And I also love the story, like the saga of how sales went down and people went like crazy and it became viral. And then, you know, like, and then how it stabilized, giving a sense to other brands that it's good to be brave, that you need to step up, that you need to look at the data and say, like, it's going to create a bump, and a bump is good because we need to stand up. Because the time in which brands didn't have to stand up and have a position are gone. And people don't want, consumers don't want you to have a position of everything, but on things that are related to you as a brand, you have to have a position, and you can no longer be like, no news, good news, and we're not going to comment on anything. This particular campaign attracted me to Procter & Gamble so much in the work that I'm doing now, which is US Hispanics. Pretty much the same example. Completely invisible. When they are visible, they are seen as takers, not makers, negative, not positive. And I approached them based on this campaign and said, like, I need you to care for my community. I need you to bring us that visibility. And I know that even if, even if you're going to have a slap on the face because Hispanics are associated to migration or to drug trafficking and so on, I want to show better. And I know that the consumers will be there. And sure enough, we're working with them. But I think that this is the kind of company and the kind of brand that I would like to see in the future.
Yeah.
I really like that phrase, clever, brave, that you use, the kind of combination of courage, but also data, right, and insight. And like you said, there was a backlash. There was a controversy around, when this came out and people said they've got this wrong and things. How important is it, do you think, if you're going to make those leaps, creative leaps of faith, if you like, that it's backed up with some element of research and insight and that? Or, and what's the balance between those two things, do you think?
I mean, for me, I've seen it again and again, particularly working on safer areas like sustainability, and when we launched the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at how they could become a framework and how different brands were like, I know that consumers, I was like, here's the data, 66% of millennials will buy based on their heart. Voters are, people are buying with their beliefs and voting with their hearts, and you just have to see how, look, this is example, Target put gender biased, gender neutral toilets. People like age people stopped buying in Target for 6 months. Fair enough, they came back. So there is again and again data that indicates that people don't like change when they don't like change, but then they adapt and they actually respect even more, their choices. And those people that want, like particularly millennials and Gen Z, the data is clear. They want to be with companies that have a heart, and they recognize that the world is browner, more feminine, and with a bigger heart than ever, and they want to actually make their consumer choices based on that.
That's a really nice jumping off point into the more kind of general discussion. Priya, I wanted to ask you, like Claudia says, the people are changing, the audiences are changing, and brands are in some cases having to catch up with that. I know in your work, you've spoken before about triple bottom lines and the importance of organizations that, look at environmental and social impact alongside profit as a very, key characteristic. I suppose my question is, how good are brands at doing that? And how much more work is there to do you think, for organizations?
That's a really good question, Rob. And this is something also that came up in our discussion with the other judges. We did see that in the so-called sustainability and the green revolution we had, where people were doing a lot of greenwashing, and now you have a lot of social good washing as well. So there is this kind of trend because, like Claudia and others have mentioned, millennials are going for brands with purpose. And I think, how deep is that purpose, and is that purpose actually sustainable to your profit? Like Kat's great example from Carrefour as well. So I think what's really happening right now is, I think the consumers probably, and the word consumer is probably a bad word as well, because people are also creating stuff. So the people who choose to buy products and services from companies are actually using their buying power as a political and social choice on what they will decide to support and not support. And given that, unfortunately or fortunately, most things have become transactional, whether that's relationships, whether that's capitalism, whether that's market economy, people have realized that buying power can actually change the way companies are choosing to kind of interact either with their, employee relationships, the, Amazon backend warehouse, labor rules. Things are getting a lot more transparent. So I think it's actually for a lot of brands to be able to have an authentic voice and really walk the talk. It becomes almost like, crazy if they don't do that. And recently BlackRock, which is one of the largest private investment companies, have actually come up with this thing where most companies which they have in their portfolio would have to have climate related positive policies to be able to measure the returns back to the shareholders. So this is no longer trendy and sexy just somewhere else. It's really about making sure that, the whole, the way the businesses are conducting businesses and doing businesses takes into consideration the impact of what they are going to be doing, not just on the environment, but on the people. So I don't see how you can do business anymore in the old way, given what we have seen already with COVID and other things with the climate emergency. So I think it's actually a very interesting time to be a designer.
It's no time to preach water and drink wine. This is where if you don't do, like, it's better to be quiet than to fake it. Yep. Like, this is no, like I see already, you know, like the teeth of the people have been sharpened in this time, and they're gonna come and bite anyone and be angry about anyone that is, you know, like saying things that they're not doing. So if you're Corona, you're like holding your 6-pack, you know, like with eatable, whatever it is, instead of plastic, but in your office, you're printing paper like crazy and not treating your employees right, you're going to be fried. And you're going to be fried by your consumers and your, you know, like, and your employees, because as you say, this is brand democracy and this is employee democracy where the power is out there. So I would just say, if you're a brand watching, just like, don't fake it until you make it and then talk about it.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, Claudia. This idea of like walking before you talk, or being, you know, really authentic and thoughtful in your approach, and then getting out there and singing from the mountaintop. I think, you know, there's unprecedented transparency now. You know, you're one social post away from someone exposing your bad behavior. So I think it's not just the right thing to do. I think it's also the important thing to do from a business standpoint, is to really make sure that you are checking all the boxes and spending the time doing the hard work in the dark, and then, you know, talking about it once you've gotten to a place of kind of confidence and authenticity, you know, and the impact that you're creating.
I was just going to say, like, that is a kind of point about how far you embed kind of design principles. And when I mean that, I mean also kind of thinking through unintended consequences, being empathetic. So, you know, if you're thinking about health and wellbeing and sustainable living, which are kind of two parts of our strategy and design council, well, the first thing we need to do is make sure we've got an internal health and wellbeing team who thinks about all of our health and wellbeing as staff members in our associate network. And we also think about sustainability. So what can we do ourselves before we even start about thinking about the products and services that we're putting out into the world? So as Kwame was saying, kind of this authenticity and starting with the self, then the organization, and then the system.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting from the Volvo example, Kwame, that you talked about. You know, you said they've hung their hat on that one same issue for a lot of years, and I think it's interesting that they've committed to that, you know, and it doesn't feel like it's out the blue and kind of, why are they doing that suddenly?
It's so in keeping with the brand purpose. I remember, and this is just one example, I think it was last year or the year before, they submitted a case around, I think it was called the EVA initiative, where they, as Volvo, have the largest database of crash test data on female sort of forms. And they open sourced it. They just released it out into the world. You know, I think Volvo pioneered the seatbelt. They've had so many initiatives that go or that are in keeping with that narrative about safety. But they also are generous in their approach, you know, so they kind of opened up their data to help other car companies improve their vehicles based on the insights that they gained testing all these crash test dummies. So I think, to me, it's those kinds of behaviors, you know, those brand actions really build the narrative for a company. And I think it's very important for you to do that soul searching and understand what is truly important to my business and my brand. And once you've landed on what those imperatives are, start to build brand actions that help reinforce that. And then you have all the fodder you're going to need for kind of marketing. You know, you just do these very important, real things that move the needle, and then you talk about them.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's going to be super important. And I think that festivals like this have the power to send messages to companies and brands globally about what's important and what will come. And I think that openness and that authenticity and that desire to generate change will be even more important, particularly because the world will change, has changed. And the consumer behavior will change, and the things that matter will be different. And so how are we going to, you know, like, how are we going to use that knowledge and that data, and everyone that is doing consumer insights and market, you know, like market research will actually have to be very, very generous and very brave as well to say, like, I'm not a destination yet, but I know that, for example, celebrations in your family, like Thanksgiving, will matter so much. Much more than before, and therefore let me adapt my product. Let me talk to you right now in that transformation and see what matters to you. You see what I mean? This is not a time, and I don't think it will be the time for the next 24 months to sell. It's sort of about to solve, and solve taking into account the new realities of the people that you care about.
You touched on something there, Claudia, that I wanted to ask about, which was data. There was a lot of controversy around data and privacy and you know, the amount of information people are happy to share and want to share. A couple of these projects really involved data and use of data and crowdsourcing things. Priya, I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about where do you see that going in the next maybe 12 months? And in the background of everything else we're talking about, is our relationship with data going to change, do you think?
I think that's an excellent point about our relationship with data already changing. Like with COVID, we can see many countries looking at tracking people and having these apps now being put either on a government level or even on brands like Apple and Google coming together and working together to kind of provide this kind of technologies. And I find it really interesting if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when your life is in danger, your privacy probably is put on the side and you're ready to overlook certain things. But I think it really depends. I know this sounds odd, but it depends upon the context of how people are being asked to participate and contribute their data, and they have line of sight. I think Kat also raised some good points during the judging about data ethics. And you know, how people are making it clear in terms of the design principles and what they're doing with the data, how are they being respectful towards the data. The problem is many of these ends up being part of like service blueprints or design thinking, but doesn't get articulated in a way that public can understand. And just like, you know, the food industry has done a really good job with provenance and supply chain, are able to show food labels so you understand how something was produced. What we seem to have an opportunity now is in electronic or digital experiences to see how the data has been captured, how people are using those algorithms to manifest different kind of weightages in the decision-making system. How does that go downstream and takes that decision on your behalf, or you give the machine the responsibility to do that decision on your behalf. So we're actually lacking that language and grammar and that nuance that many industries have done. And I think this is exactly why I feel like, you know, data plus action equals change. But we have to create that vocabulary and not just this talk about privacy, because a bit like 1984 George Orwell, you know, you can't just keep saying it's going to be bad. You have to create a new vocabulary for consumers to understand or people to understand their rights and be able to also ask questions. And I think this is really something that's required. And maybe the Impact Award next year can put more focus on, you know, this kind of projects and how people are creatively helping a lot of people to understand how their data is being used in making campaigns or making better choices.
Kat, how difficult are those conversations around data and privacy within kind of creative settings? You know, how hard are they to have, honestly, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's, honestly, I think many designers and AI or data specialists often don't talk to each other, and that's kind of part of the issue. And there's things like, you know, a common language. So even the word memory to a data scientist is something hard and fixed and never deletable. And memory to a researcher, an ethnographer, is something that's ephemeral and part of forgetting as part of the beauty of life. So people are just coming at things from very, very different angles, but also then being able to explain that to the public. And I think, you know, in all the data ethics work that I did when I was in government, creating a data ethics framework for how government should use data, it's always this balance between the kind of the public benefit and then the level of privacy, and being able to show, because often with data you don't quite know what's going to happen with it, so being able to constantly go back and make that visible to the public in a way that they can then say how much or how little data they want to give, but also how much autonomy the machine or versus another human can have in making a decision on the back of that data. So finding ways, like those examples sound amazing, we can find kind of immersive ways for people to be experiencing the kind of the back end, the black box of algorithms and how they're used.
It seems to me from the work you all picked to talk about, the common thread was, I suppose, the excellence of the ambition, the idea, and the execution. You know, you had to have all of those three, I think, for the projects that you were flagging up as the most successful ones. I wondered, did you see projects where perhaps the ambition was there and the idea was there, but they fell short on the execution. Kwame, was that something that came up at all in the jury room and the discussions?
Yeah, I mean, I think a fourth criteria that I would add was the impact as well. You know, it's very important that all the projects we chose had a tangible, quantifiable impact, whether, you know, great or small. We needed to see that there was evidence that it moved the needle. And I think all the projects that you saw there did that pretty successfully. I think there were definitely more than a few projects that were, you know, either well crafted with no impact, or with lots of the impact, just not, you know, craft at the level that we would like to see. There were some projects that felt like a beautiful, again, idea and a strong execution, but maybe not from the best sort of actor or from the best categories. A lot of conversation about that. So if you're in, you know, alcohol or fast food, you know, can you really do good when inherently your business may not necessarily be adding the best value to sort of humanity and to society? So I think those are kind of complex issues, and they're tough to navigate, you know. But we had a really healthy discussion about whether we should, you know, still reward companies who were, you know, doing their best, even if the category that they're from wasn't necessarily the most, you know, positive in terms of the grand scheme of how we're evolving as a culture.
Mm-hmm. And that complexity you talk about, and I mean, it sounds thrillingly complex, but how much more important is it to have the right discussion when children are the target audience? There's two projects that were flagged up which were aimed specifically at children. Kat, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you know, what does that add to the kind of process and the conversation around these projects?
Well, I mean, it adds, I mean, any kind of vulnerable group requires another level of scrutiny about what you do. I mean, particularly children, because of all of the reasons that we can imagine that people might, you know, that they themselves might not have a kind of enough worldliness or agency to be able to make the decisions about whether they're interacting with something or not. So yeah, there's always that kind of another ethical dimension to it. And I also, I'm trying to articulate it, but there's something about kind of, it's about, I suppose, the power that kind of a product or a service provides for someone. So how much choice they have over it, how much ability do they have to then kind of use it to move forward with their life. Sorry, that's not articulated particularly well, but it's moving consumers from being these kind of passive recipients of things, of a product to be used in the way that the kind of the producer of that product intended, to something which is more not quite prosumerism, but something which is a much more kind of negotiated conversation between a product and a consumer.
And yeah, building on Kat's point, a really good point about giving power back to even children and agency, because I think empowerment, I think the challenge with lots of social issues is when you treat people as victims. I'm not saying children are victims, but then there's this kind of power saying, oh, you need help, versus here's this AR application, you can make up your own mind about what the history class is about. That's a very different way for somebody to come up to their own opinion about what history is about, or about with Mr. Humphreys figuring out what the situation is in the home. So I think this is where I feel good design doesn't lecture you, but gives you this kind of tools and affordances in the way you experience the solution, that you can come up to your own opinion. Funny enough, art tries to do that as well, like a great painting lets you figure out. But I think good design, given the topics are quite complex and things are getting ambiguous, I think becomes really interesting about not providing solutions to problems, but letting people ask the right questions. Because one of the things I got very annoyed judging this award sometimes is everything, for every problem there was a solution. And we tend to get into the solutionism way of thinking, because some problems are not, they can't be solved. It's just a continuing dialogue, and every year you move the barometer a bit ahead, and you hopefully are able to educate people, and people are able to change their behaviors. So I think the really good design is about when people can start asking the right questions and become self-aware, then get to the next step of being able to make that change.
I was going to say, to me, there's a very important conversation about the potential for future impact, because to Priya's point, some of these issues are really complex and very matrixed, and there is no silver bullet that's going to come in and solve it. So in some of the creative work, it was great to see that the thinking had been put in to engineer these ideas to grow and to gain momentum and to scale and to have even greater impact in the future. Something like Lifesaver, for example. Yes, it was a small test, I believe, in the Netherlands, but you can see very easily how that idea could export and have a much greater impact if it were adopted in a few more cities or a few more countries. Her story, same sort of thought, you know, that can absolutely scale, and of course continue to tell stories about women, but they could, you know, evolve it, and it could be people of color, and it could be differently abled people. I mean, it could do so much in terms of how it educates and sort of programs us all. So for me, that's something that's always in the back of my mind, is how do we make sure that we're building things with permanence, and we're building things to grow and scale, and ideally like benefit from the network effect that we all see with a lot of the apps that we use and that sort of thing. Like these aren't finite things. Like they can evolve and grow and continue to drive quite a lot of impact and create change.
Absolutely. My final question to all three of you, if that's okay, is if you were invited back to be on the Impact Jury 2021, what one thing would you hope to see more of in the entries? There's obviously an asterisk here. We don't know what a post-COVID world is going to look like quite, but if you could see one thing that you'd really encourage, you know, individuals or organisations who are working in this space to concentrate on. Kat, maybe you could start with that one.
I think it's picking up on the word that Kwame used earlier, which is authenticity. So it's a kind of sense of the design, you know, offering something to the world that's new, that's innovative, that helps people look at something in a new way, that creates impact. But that has also been embedded in the kind of the authenticity, the soul of the organisation proposing it. That for me feels like something we've seen glimpses of this time around, but I'd love to see more of.
Absolutely. Priya, how about you?
I think for me, it would be going to looking at system design, but in a way where it looks at the whole. So not just talk about climate emergency, but work with nature and nature-based systems to solve really tricky problems, because I feel like there is a whole piece of work that needs to be done where we acknowledge all the actors and really talk about systems design and nature coming in and becoming an equal co-partner in solving some of this, co-solving some of these challenges. That's what really excites me about more things around biology, biotechnology, those kind of areas to move into.
Fantastic. And Kwame, as the president, the final word to you.
Well, I love both responses. My only build is, for me, it's just commitment. You know, I love that we saw Carrefour win a black pencil, I think 2 years ago, for a black supermarket, and then follow that up with Act for Food. Like going deep, fully investing themselves and pivoting the entire sort of point of view of the company to help attack and address some of these issues. I think last year we saw Lionshare win a pretty high award, and this year they came back and showed they've made even more progress against the issue they were looking to attack. So, you know, my hope is, and this is something that I focus on a lot with Kin, how do we build these platforms with permanence? And how do we make sure that we inspire companies to get on this road? And it's not just a pit stop, you know, like get on the road and do the work and continue to build and drive change. And to me, that's, you know, that's the kind of commitment that can lead to really significant outcomes against some of these massive challenges.
Mm-hmm. So there you go, no excuses. That's 3 great answers for what you should be doing if you're entering this category next year. Thank you ever so much to all of you for joining us, for your time, for your insights, and for your honesty. We really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing who gets the pencils when they get announced.